Welcome to the Individuated Bookshelf, a Sophia Cycles podcast for readers who know that the right book at the right moment can change a life. I'm your host, Bea Gonzalez. Through Jungian psychology, mythology, philosophy, and the Western esoteric traditions, I explore the texts and ideas that shape the inner world. This is a space for those who read, not just for information, but for transformation. So I was recently at a reunion with people I once shared a life with in London, back when I was in graduate school. We all lived in the same international students' residence in central London, and those years were unusually intense. There was no social media then, no easy way to go home through a screen, so we did the only thing we could. We drew closer to one another. We merged, bonded, and it became quite literally a kind of family. Coming together after so many years, I realized we were not only reconnecting with one another, we were reconnecting with the atmosphere of that time. For a brief period, everything had felt heightened, our ambitions, our friendships, our sense of possibility. Near the end of the reunion, one of the fellows from the residence gave a beautiful speech about his life, how he had stumbled, changed directions, followed unlikely paths, and somehow ended up somewhere he had never imagined. Listening to him, I found myself thinking, I want to hear everyone's story, because those journeys really interest me. And of course, it did make me reflect on my own journey, how I came to found Sophia Cycles, and how, in some sense, that journey began right there in London. At that time, I had already completed a master's degree, and like many people in that environment, I assumed I would become an academic. I would do a PhD, find a way somehow to stay in that beautiful city, because that really seemed to be the goal. So I kept enrolling in courses and moving in and out of London over 5 years. Eventually, I returned with the explicit intention of doing a PhD in the history of medicine. The truth, though, is that a large part of me already knew I didn't want an academic life, not only because I have trouble centering my entire being on a single subject, as you can probably tell from everything I do with Sophia Cycles, but because it just simply didn't fit my temperament. Beneath that polite, respectable plan was a quieter desire I was afraid to name. I wanted to write novels. I wanted to create stories. At that time, independent publishing barely existed. There were far fewer paths for writers to bring work into the world, so my fear of failure, of choosing a path so precarious, kept me away from what I most wanted. Even though I had friends at London House who were writers and who shared that passion, I was still intimidated by the difficulty of the road. That last year in London was outwardly full of life. I was happily involved in the residence's events and activities. In truth, those activities were holding me together. Inside, I was wrestling with high anxiety and disordered eating. I was not happy. I didn't want to admit to it, though. Everyone seemed ambitious, focused, and firmly on track. And there I was, in a program that did not fit who I was or what I really wanted. My inner struggle remained almost completely invisible, and it went on for almost a year. What kept me sane was the community itself, the gathering, the conversations, the sense of belonging. And then on a particular day that I can still almost pinpoint, reality really broke through. I realized I could not keep living that way. I could not continue to hide in London, pretending this path was mine while quietly running from the life I actually wanted. That realization pushed me into a minor period of darkness, like that kind of inner collapse many of the writers I quote, James Hollis, Robert Johnson, and others, describe as a summons from the deeper self. They see such moments not merely as crises, but as calls from the psyche, invitations to step onto a path more intrinsic to one's nature. We resist those calls precisely because they demand something difficult and uncertain. So suddenly, I, someone generally optimistic and joyful, find myself in a rather dark place. Yet some part of me did recognize this territory. I have been there before in other moments of decisive change. I knew something had to shift. So I booked a ticket back home to Toronto and left. At the time, I thought that was a big turning point. I had returned with no clear idea of what I was going to do. My academic work didn't translate neatly into any job. I felt suspended nowhere in particular between identities. So those first months were difficult. I had to sit with the discomfort and the uncertainty. Gradually, though, I began rebuilding a life from small, concrete steps. I joined a theater group. I reconnected with friends. I took on part-time contracts that would keep me afloat while giving me the space to focus on writing. I started publishing wherever I could, short pieces in newspapers, travel articles, essays in magazines. And then I did the thing I had been afraid to do. I wrote a novel, regardless of outcome. That novel became The Bitter Taste of Time. By great good fortune, that manuscript ended up in the hands of Iris Tupholme at HarperCollins Canada, and she liked it. So the process moved quickly compared with what many writers endure. The book was published, and I thought, oh, great, now I'm on my way. This is it. This is what I've wanted for so long. I was really deeply grateful and profoundly happy. After that, I wrote a second novel, which went on to be sold in various countries and was eventually adapted even into a musical. So on paper, I had arrived at the pinnacle I had imagined, the published author, the international editions, and hey, even a stage adaptation. Yet at the height of that external success, another disquiet arose. I found myself revisited by the strange conviction that something still wasn't quite right. So that was a moment when I fully, truly immersed myself in the writers I've been quoting on Sophia Cycles for well over a decade. James Collis, Carl Jung, Marie-Louise von Franz, and many, many more. In the Jungian and contemplative traditions, as well as many Zen mindfulness teachers. Their work helped me understand what was happening. So one line in particular keeps coming back to me. It's by the American poet M.S. Merwin from his poem Wild Oats. I needed my mistakes in their order to get me here. The idea itself appears across many writers. What we call mistakes often turn out to be necessary waypoints, essential redirections rather than errors. I'm reminded also of what the philosopher Soren Kierkegaard noted when he said that life can only be understood backwards but must be lived forwards. For me, these ideas revealed two things. First, that we do in fact make choices that feel wrong or misaligned at the time, but later serve a purpose we could not yet see. Second, that healing begins when we stop resisting where we actually are. It is the resistance to reality, a refusal to inhabit our present situation, that often intensifies our suffering. The more I accepted my own sequence of mistakes, the more I saw them as the next chapters I needed, rather than the detours to be regretted. After the second novel, I realized I really couldn't keep writing the same kind of book. Those novels no longer matched the direction my inner life was taking. I'd begun Jungian analysis and had become deeply interested in the analytical process itself. I have been a lifelong reader. If I have to define myself in a single word, it would simply be reader. And my reading was pulling me towards questions of meaning, psyche, and depth. Out of that immersion, the idea for Sophia Cycles emerged. I wanted to create a space where people could gather and explore the larger ideas that had been sustaining me, the very ideas I share through my quotes and reflections. In a world where many of our older structures of meaning have eroded, institutions like the church once offered a shared symbolic framework, I felt a need to create my own kind of structure. What I needed was conversation, connection, and a community of people engaged in serious dialogue about inner life and the symbolic imagination. So that is how Sophia Cycles began, as a living circle of inquiry, a place to reflect together on literature, myth, psychology. Over the past 20 years, people have come and gone, new participants have joined. The configuration has shifted many, many times, but the core impulse has remained the same, to value the inner life and to honor the questions that arise from it. At a certain point, I realized that the project could be larger. With the proliferation of social media, it became possible to reach far beyond a single space. So I took Sophia Cycles online. That move opened an entirely new dimension. I began connecting with people across the world who resonated with these ideas, people who became a part of a wider community I deeply treasure. In that sense, the family I once found in London has been extended and transformed into this ongoing global conversation. One that, like that reunion, continually reminds me how our seemingly disparate paths can converge around the search for meaning. One of the ideas that has guided me for years comes from the poet and storyteller Robert Bly. He has a small but profound book called A Little Book on the Human Shadow. There, he describes the shadow as a long bag we drag behind us, a sack we carry through life, quietly stuffing into it the parts of ourselves that others reject, or that we reject in order to belong. As children, we learn the rules quickly. In Bly's example, a boy hits his brother and is told, "Good boys don't do that." The impulse to aggression, to anger, to self-assertion is taken out of circulation and put into that bag so that he will not be shamed or excluded. The pattern continues into adolescence when the pressure to fit in intensifies, and we keep stuffing away whatever threatens our place in the group. Speaking as a woman, I've watched and lived another version of this. Young women often put their true personalities on hold. They learn the disease to please, the habit of being the sweet, accommodating girl so that everyone remains comfortable. Over time, we conform to family expectations, cultural scripts, and even our partner's preferred image of us. Slowly, the actual self is eroded. We become less who we are and more what we have constructed in response to the world. Bry's crucial insight is that at midlife, the work must reverse. We can no longer keep dragging that unopened bag behind us. We have to begin, piece by piece, pulling its contents out. Sexuality that was denied, anger that was buried, talents we hid so as not to outshine others, anything we disowned in order to walk a path that was never really ours. This isn't simply a psychological cleanup operation. It's actually the beginning of a very different journey. From a Jungian perspective, that journey is the path of individuation, that slow, difficult process of becoming more fully oneself rather than merely a persona adapted to the world. We do this by peeling back layer after layer of habituated thought and behavior, trimming away what was adopted purely for safety and drawing closer to the core of what it means to be you. Now, that core is rarely tidy or universally pleasing. As you start to reclaim these parts, a new personality configuration emerges, one that may not match other people's preferred version of you. Everyone carries an image of who you should be, the role that feels convenient to them. As you change, you may lose friendships, roles, and even entire ways of life that were once central. But you also begin to form relationships that can meet the deeper reality of who you are. The more you understand yourself at that level, the less the loss of approval feels like a catastrophe, and the more it feels like necessary pruning. For Jung, this reclaiming of the shadow and the recentering of life around the deeper self requires an ongoing conversation with the inner world, dreams, the images, the fantasies, symbols. Much of my own work, including what I do through Sophia Cycles, is precisely that, an ongoing dialogue with the unconscious parts of myself. Now, I give those parts names and faces in my fiction. Characters appear, stories form, and in following them, I begin to see aspects of myself I might otherwise have ignored. One of the unexpected gifts of writing fiction is what happens when you're invited to book clubs or reader gatherings. Readers often tell you what they've noticed in your work, motifs, emotional currents, symbolic patterns, and often they perceive things you weren't really consciously aware of. It's another way the unconscious speaks, through the response of others to what you have created. That shared reflection becomes part of the individuation process, revealing threads you couldn't see alone. Now, this kind of work is really meaningful, but it is not easy. It takes time and it takes courage. It may ask you to leave relationships, jobs, and identities that once anchored you. You find yourself in a liminal space, like the one I inhabited in London, where you feel as if you're stepping off a ledge without knowing where you will land. It can be anxious, disorienting even. Yet, if you can stay with it, stay with the uncertainty, the anxiety, the nights when you don't know who you are anymore, that very space begins to open into something else. It becomes the threshold to the self that is authentically yours, no longer built slowly in response to external demands for safety, comfort, and belonging. And although that new self may not fit every shoe the world offers you, it is really the only one that truly fits you. Now, I formed Sophia Cycles, both the in-person group and the online community, as a way to offer a kind of a roadmap for this inner journey. The writers I quote and comment on are the very people who provided me with the guidance I needed, and the work now serves as guidance for others. I'm often asked online how to begin, which books might help, where to start, when the territory of the psyche feels really vast and uncharted. Since this podcast is called The Individuated Bookshelf, it's fitting to name at least 2 books that can support you at the outset. The first is Inner Work by Robert A. Johnson, and this is a practical 4-step introduction to engaging with dreams and the unconscious. The second is Reflections on the Art of Living, edited by Diane Osborne, which gathers Joseph Campbell's reflections on myth, meaning, and the art of living a fully engaged life. There are many more. James Hollis' extensive body of work, for example, offers a sustained exploration of midlife, meaning, and the challenges of modern existence. But those 2 books are gentle, accessible entry points into this adventure with your own inner world. I can't promise the journey is easy, and it never truly ends. Yet in my experience, it is the only journey that ultimately satisfies when what you are seeking is not just comfort, but passion and purpose. So when I look back now, from that residence in London to the novels, to Jungian analysis, to the birth of Sophia Cycles and this podcast, I can see what I couldn't see at the time. I needed my mistakes in order to get me here. Like Kierkegaard, I know that my life only began to make sense when I read it backwards, even though I had to keep living it forwards, often in confusion and doubt. If there is a thread running through all of this, it is simply this. The work of individuation asks us to trust that our missteps, our detours, even our collapses can become material for meaning if we're willing to stay in conversation with our inner world. The books I mentioned, the writers I quote, the gatherings I host through Sophia Cycles are all invitations to continue that conversation, to honor the questions that won't go away, and to follow them where they lead, even when the path is anything but straight. Until next time. Thanks for listening. If you would like to know more about the Sophia Cycle projects or the work I do, please go to sophiacycles.com. Until next time.